Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to the Psychological Disorders edition of 5-Minute Psych. In this 5-minute segment, we'll look at dissociative disorders, beginning with an overview of dissociative disorders before examining 3 different types of dissociative disorders. Then we'll focus more closely on dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, as well as some potential causes. Dissociative disorders are among the most mystifying and least understood of all the psychological disorders. Dissociation refers to a split between conscious awareness and our thoughts and feelings, and it involves a breakdown in how our memories are integrated with our identity. We've all experienced this to some degree, driving to work and not remembering the last 5 minutes, or listening to someone talk but being elsewhere in your head and not hearing them. But for serious cases, it can function as an escape from something stressful, and it's considered a disorder when the dissociation is chronic and severe enough that it causes dysfunction and distress in the individual. We'll look more closely at 3 types of dissociative disorders: dissociative amnesia, depersonalization disorder, and dissociative identity disorder. With dissociative amnesia, there is extensive but selective loss of memory following trauma, and there's no known physical cause for the amnesia. Doctors can't find any visible injury to the brain at all. Sometimes the person can't remember anything from the past, while other times the memory loss is selective, like they forget specific events or people, but still remember everything else. For example, they may remember being at the cottage, but not driving home before the accident or anything that happened immediately after. With depersonalization disorder, the person suffering has a strong feeling of disconnect from their identity or even from their own body. Again, it's usually triggered by severe stress, and once it starts, it can last for years. The person may say that they feel like they're observing their body from the outside, and that their own arms and legs look strange and completely separate from themselves. With dissociative identity disorder, the person suffering develops 2 or more separate identities, each with their own set of thoughts and memories. Each identity is unique, and although different identities may or may not know about each other, only one identity can be in consciousness at the same time. This means that different identities come and go within the same person throughout the day. Usually there's a primary identity called the host, and then other identities called alters come and go. And these identities can be completely different from each other. One could be old, another an infant, another male, another female, another might be paralyzed, another allergic to shellfish, and so on. Research has found different brainwave and voice patterns for the different identities within the same person, as if these different identities are entirely different people. We don't know what causes dissociative identity disorder, but psychodynamic theory thinks it could be repression, when the person creates a second identity so that they can release their unconscious anxiety-provoking impulses. Cognitive psychologists view it as a way to cope with severe abuse, because most people with dissociative identity disorder suffered severe abuse as a child, and it's possible that during this time, when their identity was forming, it was more fragile, and the trauma may have made it easier to dissociate and form different selves to deal with the abuse. And then over time, these different selves may have stayed separate from the main identity. Biological explanations turn to structural abnormalities in the hippocampus and amygdala, the areas that are involved in our memory of ourselves, saying that faulty processing here could create memories that go with different versions of ourselves. And finally, some argue that dissociative identity disorder isn't even real, and that it's just something that could be created with repeated questioning by a skilled therapist or by an active imagination and repeatedly hearing about it. One thing we know is that the number of cases of dissociative identity disorder has increased dramatically since it's appeared in the media, in films like The 3 Faces of Eve, or more recently, The United States of Terror. Also, the average number of identities is now more than a dozen, whereas before it appeared in the media, the typical case had only 2 to 3 different identities. Well, we just discussed dissociative identity disorders by beginning with an overview before looking at 3 different types of dissociative disorders. Then we focused on dissociative identity disorder, the one we know the most about, and discussed several potential causes. Now, aren't you glad you had 5 minutes?